The bustling streets of New York City pulsed with life as Sarah Johnson hurried along the sidewalk, her worn-out shoes barely keeping up with her determined stride. At 25, Sarah was a picture of humility and perseverance, her second-hand clothes neat but clearly well-worn, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Despite the challenges life had thrown her way, her warm brown eyes still sparkled with hope and kindness. As she rushed into the towering skyscraper that housed Blackwood Industries, Sarah's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Today marked her first day as a personal assistant to Jonathan Blackwood, the notoriously demanding CEO of the company. It was an opportunity she couldn't afford to mess up, not when her younger sister's college tuition and her mother's medical bills depended on her success. The elevator ride to the top floor seemed to stretch on forever, each ding of a passing floor making Sarah's stomach clench tighter. When the doors finally opened to reveal a sleek, modern office space, she took a deep breath and stepped out, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. "You must be the new assistant," a cold voice cut through the air, making Sarah jump. She turned to see a tall, impeccably dressed woman regarding her with thinly veiled disdain. "I'm Victoria Blackwood, Jonathan's wife and the company's COO. Try not to embarrass us on your first day, will you?" Before Sarah could stammer out a response, Victoria had already swept past her, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and unspoken judgment. Swallowing hard, Sarah made her way to her new desk, determined not to let the encounter shake her confidence. The morning passed in a blur of phone calls, emails, and frantic note-taking as Sarah tried to keep up with the demanding pace of her new job. Just as she was beginning to feel like she might be getting the hang of things, the office fell silent, and all eyes turned to the elevator. Jonathan Blackwood strode into the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. Tall, dark-haired, and undeniably handsome, he exuded an aura of power and success. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room, finally landing on Sarah with a look of cool assessment. "Miss Johnson, I presume?" His voice was deep and authoritative. "In my office, now." Heart-pounding, Sarah followed him into the spacious corner office, notebook clutched tightly to her chest. As soon as the door closed behind them, Jonathan's demeanor changed, his polite mask slipping to reveal a sneer of contempt. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, looming over her. "I don't care about your background or your dreams. You're here to do a job, and if you can't keep up, you'll be out on the street faster than you can blink. Is that clear?" Sarah nodded, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I understand." "Good," he replied, turning away dismissively. "Now, I need you to reschedule all of my appointments for the next 2 weeks. I have a sudden, personal matter to attend to." As Sarah hurried to comply, she couldn't help but notice the flicker of something, worry? Fear? That passed across Jonathan's face. But she pushed the thought aside, focusing on the task at hand. She couldn't afford to let her curiosity get the better of her, not when so much was riding on this job. The days that followed were a whirlwind of demands, barely concealed insults, and impossible tasks. Jonathan seemed to take a perverse pleasure in pushing Sarah to her limits, criticizing her every move and belittling her efforts in front of the entire office. "Is it really so difficult to get a simple coffee order right?" he snapped one morning, dumping the contents of his cup into the trash. "Or is that too much to expect from someone of your background?" Sarah bit her lip, fighting back tears as she hurried to remake the coffee. She couldn't understand why he seemed to hate her so much, why he went out of his way to make her life miserable. But she refused to give up, drawing strength from the thought of her family and the difference this job could make in their lives. What Sarah didn't know was that her unwavering kindness and resilience were starting to have an effect on those around her. Emily, a fellow assistant, began to smile at her in the hallways, occasionally offering words of encouragement. Even some of the executives, who had initially ignored her existence, started to take notice of her dedication and quiet competence. As the weeks passed, Sarah's reputation for hard work and integrity slowly began to grow. She stayed late every night, meticulously organizing files and preparing reports, always going above and beyond what was asked of her. And though Jonathan's treatment of her remained harsh, she began to notice small cracks in his armor, moments when his eyes would linger on her with something almost like respect before he caught himself and snapped out another cruel remark. One rainy evening, as Sarah was preparing to leave the office, she overheard a heated conversation coming from Jonathan's office. Curiosity getting the better of her, she inched closer to the door, her eyes widening as she caught snippets of the discussion. "You can't keep this hidden forever, Jonathan," Victoria's voice hissed. "If the board finds out about the embezzlement, we'll lose everything. We need to act now." "Keep your voice down," Jonathan growled. "I have it under control. No one will ever know." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, her mind reeling from the implications of what she just heard. Her boss, the man who had humiliated and belittled her for weeks, was involved in a massive financial crime. The revelation left her feeling dizzy and conflicted. As she stumbled away from the door, Sarah's foot caught on the edge of a rug, sending her tumbling to the ground with a loud thud. The voices in the office immediately fell silent, and Sarah scrambled to her feet just as the door flew open. Jonathan's face was a mask of fury as he towered over her. "What did you hear?" he demanded, grabbing her arm roughly. "And nothing, Mr. Blackwood," Sarah stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. "I just tripped, I swear." His eyes narrowed, searching her face for any sign of deception. After what felt like an eternity, he released her arm, his voice low and menacing. "Get out of my sight. And remember, Miss Johnson, curiosity can be a very dangerous thing in this world." As Sarah fled the office, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. She had always believed in doing the right thing and standing up for what was just. But now, faced with the reality of what she discovered, she found herself at a crossroads. Should she report what she'd heard, risking her job and possibly her safety? Or should she keep quiet, protecting herself but allowing a great injustice to continue? Little did Sarah know, her decision would set in motion a chain of events that would change not only her life but the lives of everyone at Blackwood Industries. As she stepped out into the rainy New York night, the weight of her newfound knowledge pressed down on her like a physical burden, leaving her to wonder if she had the strength to bear it and the courage to do what was right. The story of Sarah Johnson, the humble assistant who would bring a powerful empire to its knees, was only just beginning. And as the rain fell around her, washing away the tears she couldn't hold back, Sarah had no idea of the storms that lay ahead, or the strength she would find within herself to weather them. The following weeks at Blackwood Industries were a torment for Sarah. Every day, she walked into the office feeling as though she was carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The knowledge of Jonathan's embezzlement gnawed at her conscience, making it increasingly difficult to face her coworkers with her usual warm smile. Jonathan, for his part, seemed to have doubled down on his efforts to make Sarah's life miserable. Whether out of suspicion or simple cruelty, he piled on impossible tasks and berated her for the slightest mistakes. His gray eyes, once merely cold, now held a dangerous glint whenever they fell upon her. "Miss Johnson," he sneered one particularly trying afternoon, "I'm beginning to wonder if you're intentionally sabotaging this company with your incompetence. Or perhaps this level of failure just comes naturally to people like you?" Sarah bit her lip, fighting back tears as she gathered up the stack of reports he'd just thrown across his desk. "I'm sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I'll redo them right away." As she turned to leave, Jonathan's voice stopped her cold. "Oh, and Sarah? Remember, loyalty is everything in this business. It would be a shame if anything were to jeopardize your position here. I'm sure your family is counting on you." The thinly veiled threat sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. She hurried from the office, her mind racing. How much did Jonathan suspect? And how far would he go to protect his secret? That evening, as Sarah sat at her tiny kitchen table in her cramped apartment, she found herself staring at a framed photo of her family. Her mother's kind face smiled back at her, while her younger sister, Emily, beamed with the carefree joy of youth. The weight of responsibility pressed down on Sarah's shoulders, threatening to crush her. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Opening it, she was surprised to find Emily, her fellow assistant from work, standing in the hallway. "Emily? What are you doing here?" Sarah asked, ushering her inside. Emily's usually cheerful face was drawn with worry. "Sarah, I think you might be in danger. I overheard Mr. Blackwood talking to his wife. They mentioned your name, and it didn't sound good." Sarah's heart raced as Emily recounted the conversation she'd overheard, hushed words about taking care of the problem and ensuring Sarah's silence. The implication was clear: Jonathan was prepared to go to extreme lengths to protect his secret. "You have to do something, Sarah," Emily urged, gripping her hand. "Whatever you know, it's not worth risking your life over. Maybe it's time to go to the authorities." Sarah spent a sleepless night wrestling with her conscience. By dawn, she had made her decision. With shaking hands, she dialed the number for the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. "Hello," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My name is Sarah Johnson. I need to report a crime." The next few days passed in a blur of clandestine meetings and hushed conversations. Sarah provided the FBI with every scrap of information she could remember, every document she could discreetly copy without arousing suspicion. All the while, she continued to show up at work, plastering on a smile and pretending everything was normal. But Jonathan was far from stupid. He sensed the shift in Sarah's demeanor, the way her eyes now met his with a quiet defiance instead of fear. His treatment of her grew even more vicious, his insults more pointed. "You know, Miss Johnson," he drawled one afternoon, leaning against her desk with a predatory smile, "I've always believed that people should know their place in the world. Don't you agree?" Sarah's fingers trembled as she continued typing, refusing to meet his gaze. "I believe everyone deserves a chance to succeed, Mr. Blackwood." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. "How quaint. But you see, some people are born to lead, to shape the world as they see fit. Others are meant to serve. To know their limitations and accept them." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "I'd hate to see what happens to those who forget their place. It rarely ends well for them or their loved ones." Sarah's blood ran cold at the thinly veiled threat, but she steeled herself, drawing on a well of strength she didn't know she possessed. "Is that all, Mr. Blackwood?" she asked, her voice steady. "I have a lot of work to finish before the end of the day." Jonathan straightened, a flicker of surprise crossing his face before it settled back into its usual mask of contempt. "Indeed. Don't let me keep you from your important tasks." As he walked away, Sarah let out a shaky breath. She knew she was playing a dangerous game, but there was no turning back now. She had to see this through, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever suffered at the hands of people like Jonathan Blackwood. The following week brought an unexpected twist. As Sarah was organizing files in the records room, she stumbled upon a folder that made her heart skip a beat. Inside were documents detailing not just Jonathan's embezzlement, but a complex web of fraud that stretched back years and implicated several high-ranking executives. With trembling hands, Sarah began to make copies of the incriminating documents. She was so focused on her task that she didn't hear the door open behind her. Well, what do we have here?" Sarah whirled around to find Victoria Blackwood standing in the doorway, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the doorframe. The CEO's wife regarded Sarah with a mixture of amusement and calculation. "Mrs. Blackwood, I was just organizing some files," Sarah stammered, trying to discreetly cover the documents. Victoria's lips curled into a cold smile. "Oh, I'm sure you were, dear. The question is, what are you planning to do with what you've found?" For a moment, Sarah considered lying, but something in Victoria's eyes told her it would be futile. Instead, she straightened her spine and met the older woman's gaze. "I'm going to do what's right, Mrs. Blackwood. For everyone who's been hurt by your husband's actions." To Sarah's surprise, Victoria laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Oh, you foolish girl. You have no idea what you're up against, do you? Men like Jonathan, they don't fall. They crush anyone who dares to stand in their way." "Maybe it's time someone stood up to them anyway," Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger. Victoria studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, to Sarah's shock, she stepped aside. "Well then, Miss Johnson. Let's see what you're made of." As Sarah hurried past her, clutching the copied documents to her chest, Victoria's voice stopped her. "Oh, and Sarah? Whatever happens, remember that not everything is as it seems in this game." The cryptic warning echoed in Sarah's mind as she made her way home that evening. She knew she was racing against time now. It was only a matter of hours before Victoria informed Jonathan of what she discovered. True to her prediction, Sarah's phone rang just as she was entering her apartment. Jonathan's voice, cold and controlled, sent a chill down her spine. "Miss Johnson, I believe we need to have a conversation. Meet me at the office in 1 hour." "And Sarah?" "Come alone, or I'm afraid things might become unpleasant for your family." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. "I'll be there, Mr. Blackwood." As she gathered the documents and prepared to leave, Sarah's gaze fell on the photo of her family once more. She touched her mother's smiling face, drawing strength from the memory of her unwavering integrity. "I won't let you down," she whispered. "I promise." The night air was thick with tension as Sarah made her way back to Blackwood Industries. The streets of New York seemed eerily quiet, as if the city itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the confrontation to come. As the elevator ascended to the top floor, Sarah's mind raced through possible scenarios. Would Jonathan try to buy her silence? Threaten her? Or would he take more drastic measures to ensure his secrets remained buried? The doors opened to reveal a darkened office, lit only by the glow of the city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Jonathan stood silhouetted against the skyline, his back to her. "I must admit, Miss Johnson," he said without turning, "I underestimated you. It seems there's more to you than meets the eye." Sarah stepped into the room, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "It's over, Mr. Blackwood. I have evidence of everything, the embezzlement, the fraud. I've already contacted the authorities." Jonathan turned then, and the look in his eyes made Sarah take an involuntary step back. There was a dangerous glint there, a cornered animal desperation that sent a chill down her spine. "You foolish girl," he snarled, advancing on her. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The lives you've ruined?" Sarah stood her ground, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. "The only lives ruined are the ones you've destroyed with your greed and corruption. It's time to face the consequences of your actions." Jonathan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Consequences? You think the world works that way, Sarah? Men like me don't face consequences. We make them." He was so close now that Sarah could feel his breath on her face. His hand shot out, grabbing her arm with bruising force. "I'm going to give you one chance to reconsider. Tell me where the evidence is, agree to keep your mouth shut, and maybe, just maybe, I'll let you and your pathetic family live out your insignificant lives in peace." For a moment, Sarah felt the old fear threatening to paralyze her. But then she thought of her mother's strength, of Emily's dreams, of all the people who had suffered because of men like Jonathan Blackwood. Something inside her snapped, and a new, fierce determination flooded through her veins. With a strength she didn't know she possessed, Sarah wrenched her arm free. "No," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "I won't be silenced. And I won't let you hurt anyone else." The look of shock on Jonathan's face quickly morphed into fury. He lunged for her, but Sarah was quicker. She darted around him, making a break for the door. But Jonathan was not about to let her escape. He caught up to her just as she reached the elevator, his hand closing around her throat. Sarah gasped for air, clawing at his grip as he pushed her against the wall. "You should have known your place," he hissed, his face contorted with rage. "Now, I'll have to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." Just as black spots began to dance at the edges of Sarah's vision, a voice rang out from behind them. "That's enough, Jonathan." Both Sarah and Jonathan turned to see Victoria standing in the doorway, her expression a mix of disgust and resignation. Behind her stood two men in dark suits, FBI agents. Jonathan's grip loosened in shock, allowing Sarah to break free. She stumbled away, gasping for air as the agents moved in to restrain her attacker. "Victoria?" Jonathan's voice was a mixture of confusion and betrayal. "What have you done?" Victoria's smile was cold and satisfied. "I've done what you never had the courage to do, darling. I'm ending this charade once and for all." As the agents read Jonathan his rights, Victoria turned to Sarah, who was still trying to catch her breath. "I must say, Miss Johnson, you've shown remarkable courage. It seems I was right about you after all." Sarah looked at her in confusion. You planned this?" Victoria's laugh was tinged with bitterness. "Let's just say I've been waiting for someone like you to come along. Someone with the integrity and strength to do what needed to be done." As Jonathan was led away, still shouting threats and accusations, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions wash over her. Relief, exhaustion, and a budding sense of triumph battled for dominance. Victoria placed a hand on her shoulder, her voice softer than Sarah had ever heard it. "You've done a brave thing, Sarah. Now, let's see about getting you the recognition you deserve." As they walked towards the elevator together, Sarah couldn't help but feel that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in her life. She had faced her fears, stood up to injustice, and emerged stronger for it. The New York skyline glittered beyond the windows, a testament to the dreams and ambitions of millions. And now, Sarah knew, she had earned her place among them, not through cruelty or corruption, but through unwavering integrity and courage. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. The road ahead would undoubtedly be challenging, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face whatever came her way. The humble assistant had found her voice, and the world would never be the same. The weeks following Jonathan Blackwood's arrest were a whirlwind for Sarah Johnson. The once quiet assistant found herself at the center of a media storm, her face splashed across newspapers and television screens as the whistleblower who had brought down one of New York's most notorious corporate tyrants. As Sarah sat in her tiny apartment, surrounded by stacks of newspapers with headlines like "Humble Heroine Exposes Billion-Dollar Fraud" and "From Assistant to Crusader," the Sarah Johnson story, she couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The girl who had once been invisible was now the talk of the town, and the attention was both exhilarating and terrifying. A knock at the door startled her from her reverie. She opened it to find Emily, her fellow assistant and now close friend, standing there with a wide grin and a bottle of champagne. "Time to celebrate, superstar," Emily exclaimed, sweeping into the apartment. "You're the toast of New York City." Sarah couldn't help but laugh as Emily popped the cork, the bubbly liquid spilling over onto the coffee table. I don't know if I'll ever get used to this, she admitted, accepting a glass. Emily's expression softened. You deserve every bit of it, Sarah. You stood up to that monster when no one else would. You're a hero. As they sipped their champagne, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Victoria Blackwood, asking to meet her for lunch the next day. Despite everything that had happened, Sarah still felt a mix of trepidation and curiosity when it came to Jonathan's enigmatic wife. The following afternoon, Sarah found herself seated across from Victoria at an exclusive rooftop restaurant, the Manhattan skyline sprawling out before them. Victoria, as always, was the picture of elegance, but there was a new warmth in her eyes as she regarded Sarah. You've certainly made quite a splash, my dear, Victoria said, raising her glass in a toast. How are you holding up? Sarah smiled wryly. Honestly? I'm not sure. It all feels a bit surreal. Victoria nodded understandingly. I can imagine. But you should know, Sarah, that what you've done is truly remarkable. You've not only exposed Jonathan's crimes but opened the door for a complete overhaul of corporate culture in the city. As their lunch progressed, Victoria revealed more about her own role in the events that had unfolded. She had long suspected Jonathan's illegal activities but had been gathering evidence quietly, waiting for the right moment and the right ally to bring it all to light. When I saw how Jonathan treated you, how he tried to break your spirit, I knew you were different, Victoria explained. I saw in you the strength and integrity that I had lost sight of in myself over the years. Sarah was stunned by the revelation. But why didn't you come forward yourself? Victoria's smile turned sad. My dear, in this world, the wife of a powerful man is often seen as either complicit or oblivious. I needed someone beyond reproach, someone whose motives couldn't be questioned. You were that person, Sarah. As they parted ways, Victoria handed Sarah a business card. The board of directors is meeting next week to discuss the future of Blackwood Industries. I think you should be there. Sarah's eyes widened. Me? But I'm Justin Dash. An assistant? Victoria finished, her eyebrow arched. I think we both know you're far more than that now. The day of the board meeting arrived, and Sarah found herself standing outside the imposing Blackwood Industries building, her heart pounding. She was dressed in a new suit, a gift from Emily, who had insisted she needed to dress the part, but she still felt out of place among the stream of executives entering the building. As she made her way to the conference room, Sarah couldn't help but recall all the times she had hurried through these halls, head down, trying to avoid Jonathan's cruel gaze. Now, people were stopping to stare, some even offering words of encouragement or gratitude. The board meeting was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. As she sat at the long table, surrounded by some of the most powerful people in New York's business world, she felt a surreal sense of déjà vu. How many times had she stood in the corner of this very room, silently taking notes while Jonathan held court? Victoria, who had taken over as interim CEO, opened the meeting with a comprehensive overview of the company's situation in the wake of Jonathan's arrest. The mood was somber as she detailed the extent of the fraud and the challenges that lay ahead. However, Victoria continued, her gaze sweeping the room, this is also an opportunity. An opportunity to rebuild Blackwood Industries on a foundation of integrity and ethical business practices. And I believe the person to lead us in this new direction is sitting right here with us. All eyes turned to Sarah, who felt her cheeks flush under the scrutiny. Miss Johnson, one of the board members spoke up, his tone skeptical. While we all appreciate your role in exposing the fraud, what qualifies you to have a say in the future of this company? Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself. She thought of all the humiliations she had endured, all the times she had bitten her tongue in the face of injustice. No more. With all due respect, sir, she began, her voice growing stronger with each word, I may not have an Ivy League degree or years of executive experience. But what I do have is an intimate understanding of how this company operates at every level. I've seen firsthand the toll that unchecked greed and corruption can take, not just on the bottom line, but on the people who are the true heart of this organization. The room fell silent as Sarah continued, passion infusing her words. I've also seen the potential for greatness here. The dedicated employees who pour their hearts into their work, despite being undervalued and overlooked. The innovative ideas that get stifled because they don't fit into a narrow vision of profit at all costs. She leaned forward, her gaze sweeping the room. What qualifies me, gentlemen, is that I represent the change this company desperately needs. I may not know everything about running a corporation, but I know about integrity, hard work, and treating people with dignity. And I believe that's the foundation we need to rebuild Blackwood Industries. As Sarah finished speaking, she was met with a moment of stunned silence. Then, to her amazement, one of the board members began to applaud. Others joined in, and soon the room was filled with the sound of clapping and murmurs of approval. Victoria's smile was proud as she turned to address the board. I move to nominate Sarah Johnson for a position on the board of directors, with a specific focus on ethical business practices and employee relations. All in favor? The ayes that followed were unanimous. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah found herself surrounded by board members offering congratulations and business cards. Her head was spinning with the sudden turn of events, but beneath the shock was a growing sense of determination. She had been given a platform, a chance to make real change, and she was not going to waste it. As she left the building that evening, Sarah paused on the steps, looking up at the towering skyscraper that had once been a source of such anxiety and dread. Now, it represented possibility, a future she could help shape. Her phone buzzed with a text from her sister. Mom's surgery went great. She's asking for you. Coming to visit this weekend? Sarah smiled, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. This was why she had fought so hard, why she had risked everything. For her family, and for all the families who deserved a fair shake in a world that often seemed rigged against them. As she hailed a taxi, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a store window. The woman looking back at her stood tall, confident, a far cry from the timid assistant who had first walked through Blackwood Industries' doors. She had found her voice, and she intended to use it. Little did Sarah know, her journey was far from over. As news of her appointment to the board spread, not everyone was celebrating. In a dimly lit office across town, a group of men, former associates of Jonathan Blackwood, were plotting their next move. "This little upstart thinks she can change the game," one of them growled, tossing a newspaper with Sarah's picture onto the desk. "We need to show her that some things never change in this town." The others nodded in agreement, their faces shadowed with malice. Sarah Johnson may have won the battle, but the war for the soul of corporate America was just beginning. As Sarah settled into her new role at Blackwood Industries, she quickly realized that changing a corporate culture was no easy task. While many employees welcomed the fresh perspective she brought, others were resistant to change, clinging to the old ways of doing business. One particularly challenging afternoon, as Sarah left yet another tense meeting, she found herself face to face with Gerald Thompson, one of the company's longest-serving executives and a close friend of Jonathan Blackwood. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone dripping with condescension, "I hope you're finding your new position satisfactory." Sarah straightened her spine, meeting his gaze head-on. "It has its challenges, Mr. Thompson, but I'm committed to making positive changes here." Gerald's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Changes, yes. But one must be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. This company was built on certain traditions. If by traditions you mean corruption and exploitation, then yes, I intend to throw those out," Sarah replied, her voice firm. "Blackwood Industries has a chance at a fresh start, Mr. Thompson. I hope you'll be part of that." As Gerald walked away, his face dark with barely concealed anger, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just made a powerful enemy. But she refused to be intimidated. She had come too far to back down now. Over the next few weeks, Sarah threw herself into her work with a passion that inspired those around her. She implemented new policies to improve working conditions, established an anonymous reporting system for ethical concerns, and championed a mentorship program to help lower-level employees advance their careers. One evening, as Sarah was working late in her new office, a far cry from the tiny cubicle she once occupied, there was a knock at the door. She looked up to see Maria, one of the janitorial staff she had befriended during her days as an assistant. "Miss Sarah," Maria said, her eyes shining with unshed tears, "I just wanted to thank you. Because of the new education program you started, my daughter is going to be able to attend college. You've changed our lives." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat as she hugged the older woman. This was why she had taken on this challenge, why she continued to fight against the odds. For people like Maria, for the countless employees who had been overlooked and undervalued for far too long. As word of Sarah's initiative spread, she began to receive invitations to speak at business schools and conferences. The girl who had once been afraid to raise her voice in meetings was now addressing auditoriums full of aspiring entrepreneurs and business leaders. "Success doesn't have to come at the expense of ethics," she told a packed hall at Columbia Business School. "In fact, I believe that in the long run, ethical business practices are the only sustainable path to true success." Her words resonated with many, but they also made her powerful enemies. The old guard of New York's business elites saw Sarah as a threat to their way of life, a naive idealist who needed to be taught a harsh lesson. One rainy evening, as Sarah was leaving a charity event, she was approached by a man she recognized as one of Jonathan Blackwood's former associates. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Johnson," he said, his voice low and menacing. "There are forces at work here that you can't possibly understand. For your own good, I suggest you reconsider your crusade." Sarah's heart raced, but she stood her ground. "Is that a threat, Mr. Callahan?" The man's smile was cold. "Consider it a friendly warning. Not everyone appreciates your particular brand of reform." As he melted back into the crowd, Sarah's mind whirled. She had known there would be resistance to her efforts, but this felt different. This felt dangerous. When she confided in Victoria about the encounter, the older woman's face grew grave. "I was afraid of this," she said, pouring them both a stiff drink. "Jonathan's network runs deep, Sarah. There are powerful people who benefited from his corruption, and they won't give up their privileges without a fight." Sarah took a sip of her drink, feeling the burn of the alcohol in her throat. "So what do we do?" Victoria's eyes gleamed with a mixture of pride and worry. "We fight back. But we have to be smart about it. These people play dirty, and they won't hesitate to use any means necessary to protect their interests." As they strategized late into the night, Sarah couldn't help but feel a mix of exhilaration and fear. She had started this journey seeking justice, but now she found herself at the center of a battle for the very soul of corporate America. The next morning, as Sarah walked into Blackwood Industries, she was met with chaos. Overnight, anonymous sources had leaked damaging information about the company to the press, sending the stock price plummeting. Employees were huddled in groups, whispering anxiously, while phones rang off the hook with calls from panicked investors. Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. This was a deliberate attack, a warning shot from those who wanted to see her fail. But she had not come this far to be cowed by scare tactics. As she strode toward the conference room where the emergency board meeting was being held, Sarah caught her reflection in a window. The woman looking back at her was battle-ready, her eyes alight with determination. She may have started as a humble assistant, but she had grown into a force to be reckoned with. The war for Blackwood Industries and for the future of ethical business practices was about to begin in earnest. And Sarah Johnson was ready to lead the charge. The emergency board meeting was a tempest of accusations and fear. As Sarah entered the room, she could feel the weight of every gaze upon her. Some looked to her with hope, others with barely concealed contempt. Gerald Thompson was the first to speak, his voice dripping with venom. "Well, Miss Johnson, it seems your reforms have borne fruit. Our stock is in freefall, the press is having a field day, and our investors are in panic mode. Are you satisfied with the chaos you've wrought?" Sarah took a deep breath, steeling herself against the onslaught. She looked around the room, meeting each pair of eyes in turn. "What's happening right now is not the result of our reforms," she said, her voice steady and clear. "This is a deliberate attack by those who benefited from the old, corrupt system. They're scared of change, and they're trying to bully us into submission." She placed her hands on the table, leaning forward. "But we will not be bullied. We will not compromise our integrity. We knew this wouldn't be easy, but I believe with every fiber of my being that what we're doing is right. And in the long run, it will make Blackwood Industries stronger than ever." Victoria stood up, moving to stand beside Sarah. "I agree with Miss Johnson. This is a critical moment for our company. How we respond now will define us for years to come. We can either cave to pressure and return to the old ways, or we can stand firm and show the world that ethical business is not just possible, but profitable." The room erupted into heated debate. Some board members argued for a return to tried and true methods, while others rallied behind Sarah's vision. As the discussion raged on, Sarah felt a tap on her shoulder. It was her assistant, looking pale and worried. "Miss Johnson," he whispered, "there's someone here to see you. He says it's urgent." Excusing herself from the meeting, Sarah stepped into the hallway to find a man she didn't recognize waiting for her. He introduced himself as Agent Roberts from the FBI. "Miss Johnson, we have reason to believe your life may be in danger," he said without preamble. "We've uncovered a plot against you, orchestrated by some of Jonathan Blackwood's old associates. They see you as a threat to their way of doing business, and they're willing to go to extreme lengths to stop you." Sarah felt her heart racing, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What kind of danger are we talking about, Agent Roberts?" The agent's expression was grim. "We're not sure of the specifics yet, but these are dangerous people with a lot to lose. We'd like to offer you protection." As the reality of the situation sank in, Sarah felt a mix of fear and determination wash over her. She thought of Maria and her daughter, of all the employees whose lives were changing for the better because of the reforms she'd implemented. She couldn't back down now. "Thank you, Agent Roberts," she said, her voice steady. "I appreciate the offer of protection, but I can't hide. I have a company to run and a mission to fulfill. I'll be careful, but I won't let them intimidate me into silence." The agent looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Sarah's expression stopped him. He handed her his card instead. "At least keep this. Call me if you notice anything suspicious, day or night." As Sarah returned to the board meeting, her mind was whirling. The stakes had just gotten much higher, but oddly enough, she felt more resolute than ever. This wasn't just about Blackwood Industries anymore. It was about standing up to a system of corruption that had gone unchecked for far too long. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sarah worked tirelessly to stabilize the company, meeting with investors to reassure them, giving interviews to counter the negative press, and doubling down on her commitment to ethical business practices. Despite the pressure and the looming threat to her safety, Sarah found herself thriving. The timid assistant who had once cowered under Jonathan Blackwood's cruel gaze was gone, replaced by a leader who stood tall in the face of adversity. One evening, as Sarah was working late in her office, she received an unexpected visitor. It was Emily, her old friend from her assistant days, looking nervous and conflicted. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," Emily said, wringing her hands. "I've been offered a job at a rival company. They want me to spy on you, to report back on your plans and strategies." Sarah felt a pang of hurt and betrayal, but as she looked at her friend's anguished face, she realized Emily was here to warn her, not to accept the offer. "Oh, Emily," Sarah sighed, moving to hug her friend. "Thank you for telling me. I know that must have been difficult." Emily broke down in tears. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. I didn't know what to do. They threatened my family if I didn't cooperate." As Sarah comforted her friend, her mind raced. This was a new low, even for her enemies. Targeting her friends and colleagues was a line she couldn't allow them to cross. "It's okay, Emily," she said, an idea forming in her mind. "In fact, I think you should take the job." Emily looked up, shocked. "What?" "But Sarah." Sarah's eyes gleamed with determination. "We can use this to our advantage. Feed them false information, find out what they're planning. It's time we turned the tables on them." As they spent the next few hours strategizing, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. Her enemies thought they could isolate her, break her spirit. Instead, they were only making her stronger, more determined than ever to succeed. The next morning, Sarah called an all-hands meeting of Blackwood Industries employees. As she stood before them, she could feel the mix of hope and uncertainty in the room. "I know the past few weeks have been challenging," she began, her voice clear and strong. "Our company is under attack, not because we've done anything wrong, but because we've dared to do what's right. There are powerful forces out there who want to see us fail, who want to prove that ethical business can't succeed in today's world." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "But I'm here to tell you that they're wrong. What we're doing here isn't just good for our souls, it's good for business. Already, we're seeing increased productivity, higher employee satisfaction, and a growing number of clients who are drawn to our commitment to integrity." Sarah's voice grew passionate as she continued. "I won't lie to you. The road ahead will be tough. Our enemies will try every trick in the book to bring us down. But I believe in this company, and I believe in each and every one of you. Together, we're not just changing Blackwood Industries. We're changing the face of corporate America." As she finished speaking, the room erupted in applause. Sarah felt a lump in her throat as she saw the determination and hope shining in the eyes of her employees. This was what she had been fighting for all along. But even as she basked in the moment of triumph, Sarah knew the real battle was just beginning. Her enemies were growing desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. That afternoon, as Sarah was leaving for a meeting with potential investors, she noticed a sleek black car following her taxi. Her heart raced as she remembered Agent Roberts' warning. Trying to stay calm, she directed her driver to take a series of random turns, eventually losing their tail in the busy New York traffic. As soon as she arrived at her destination, Sarah ducked into a quiet corner and called Agent Roberts. "I think I was just followed," she said, her voice hushed. "A black sedan, tinted windows. They tried to stay with us for several blocks." The agent's voice was grim. "This is escalating faster than we anticipated, Miss Johnson. I really must insist on assigning you a protection detail." Sarah closed her eyes, weighing her options. She hated the idea of living in fear, of needing bodyguards to go about her daily life. But she also knew that she couldn't help anyone if she was dead. "All right," she said finally. "But we need to be discreet about it. I can't have my employees or the press thinking I'm scared." As she ended the call, Sarah took a deep breath, squaring her shoulders. She had a meeting to get to, potential investors to convince. Whatever dangers lay ahead, she couldn't let them distract her from her mission. The meeting went well, with the investors impressed by Sarah's vision and her commitment to ethical practices. As she left the restaurant, flanked by her new, discreet security detail, she felt a renewed sense of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could pull this off. But Sarah's optimism was short-lived. When she returned to her apartment that evening, she found the place ransacked. Drawers were pulled out, papers scattered everywhere. On her bedroom mirror, written in what looked disturbingly like blood, was a message, "Back off or else." As she stood there, shaking, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hope you enjoyed our little redecorating job. Next time, it won't be your apartment we visit. Think about your family, Sarah. Is this really worth their lives?" For the first time since this all began, Sarah felt true fear grip her heart. She had been prepared to risk her own safety, but the thought of her loved ones in danger was almost too much to bear. As she sank to the floor, surrounded by the chaos of her violated home, Sarah felt tears begin to fall. She had always believed that doing the right thing would be worth any cost, but now, faced with the reality of that cost, she found herself wavering. Just then, her phone rang again. It was Victoria. "Sarah? Are you all right? I just heard about your apartment." Hearing the concern in Victoria's voice, Sarah felt a small spark of her old determination reignite. I'm okay," she said, wiping away her tears. "But Victoria, they threatened my family. I don't know if I can." "Listen to me, Sarah," Victoria's voice was firm. "This is exactly what they want. They're trying to break you, to make you give up. But you are stronger than they know. You've already overcome so much. Don't let them win now." As Victoria continued to speak, offering words of encouragement and support, Sarah felt her resolve slowly returning. She thought of all the people counting on her, of the change she was fighting for. Could she really abandon all of that out of fear? "You're right," she said finally, her voice growing stronger. "I can't give up. But we need to do something. We can't just keep reacting to their attacks." Victoria's voice took on a determined edge. "I agree. It's time we go on the offensive. I have an idea, but it's risky. Are you up for it?" As Victoria outlined her plan, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and apprehension. What they were considering was dangerous, potentially illegal. But if it worked, it could expose the corrupt network that had been terrorizing them and bring down some of the most powerful people in New York. "Let's do it," Sarah said, her voice firm. "Whatever it takes, we're going to see this through to the end." As she hung up the phone, Sarah looked around at her destroyed apartment. Instead of fear, she now felt a burning determination. Her enemies had made a critical mistake. In trying to break her, they had only made her more resolute. Sarah began to clean up, her mind racing with plans and strategies. The war for the soul of Blackwood Industries was about to enter a new phase, and she intended to be ready for whatever came next. Little did Sarah know, her enemies were also plotting their next move. In a dimly lit room across town, a group of men, former associates of Jonathan Blackwood and other corporate titans, were meeting to discuss the Sarah Johnson problem. "She's not backing down," one of them growled, slamming his fist on the table. "The threats, the break-in, none of it's working. If anything, she's becoming more of a symbol, rallying others to her cause." Another man, his face hidden in shadow, spoke up. "Then perhaps it's time we stop playing games. If Miss Johnson wants to be a martyr for corporate ethics, I say we give her what she wants." The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. Finally, the first man spoke again, his voice low and dangerous. Do it. Whatever it takes, Sarah Johnson needs to be stopped. Permanently. As the men dispersed, their sinister plans set in motion, the stage was set for a final, explosive confrontation. Sarah Johnson had started this journey as a humble assistant seeking justice. Now, she found herself at the center of a battle that would determine the future of not just Blackwood Industries, but the entire landscape of American business. The clock was ticking, and the stakes had never been higher. Sarah's courage, integrity, and very life would be put to the ultimate test in the days to come. The New York skyline glittered in the pre-dawn light as Sarah Johnson stood at the window of her temporary safe house, her mind racing with the events of the past few days. After the break-in at her apartment and the escalating threats, she had reluctantly agreed to go into hiding, at least until they could put Victoria's plan into action. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emily, meeting set for tonight. 8 p.m., the Golden Peacock. Our friends will be there. A mix of anticipation and fear coursed through Sarah's veins. Tonight was the night they would spring their trap, the culmination of weeks of careful planning and dangerous undercover work. Emily, playing her role as a double agent to perfection, had finally managed to secure a meeting with the shadowy figures behind the attacks on Blackwood Industries. As Sarah prepared for the day ahead, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. The timid assistant who had once scurried through the halls of Blackwood Industries, trying to avoid Jonathan's cruel gaze, was gone. In her place stood a woman hardened by adversity, driven by a fierce determination to see justice done. The day passed in a blur of final preparations and tense waiting. As evening approached, Sarah found herself in a nondescript van parked a block away from the Golden Peacock, surrounded by a team of FBI agents led by Agent Roberts. "Remember, Miss Johnson," Roberts said, his voice tense, "your safety is our primary concern. If at any point you feel the situation is getting out of hand, use the code word and we'll move in immediately." Sarah nodded, her heart pounding. She was wearing a hidden microphone and camera, ready to capture any incriminating evidence. The plan was for her to confront the conspirators directly, catching them off guard and hopefully prompting them to reveal their plans. As she stepped out of the van and made her way towards the restaurant, Sarah felt as though she was walking into the lion's den. The Golden Peacock was one of New York's most exclusive establishments, a place where the city's elite made backroom deals over overpriced cocktails and gourmet cuisine. Sarah entered the dimly lit interior, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on a secluded booth in the back. There, surrounded by an air of smug superiority, sat Gerald Thompson and 3 other men she recognized as former associates of Jonathan Blackwood. Taking a deep breath, Sarah strode towards the table, her head held high. The conversation at the booth died as she approached, replaced by looks of shock and barely concealed anger. "Gentlemen," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. "I believe we have some matters to discuss." Gerald was the first to recover, his face twisting into a sneer. "Miss Johnson. How unexpected. I'm afraid you're interrupting a private dinner." Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down, ignoring the hostile glares directed her way. "Oh, I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. After all, it's not every day someone gets the chance to confront the people who've been trying to destroy their life." One of the other men, a silver-haired individual Sarah recognized as Robert Caldwell, leaned forward menacingly. "You're playing a very dangerous game, little girl. I suggest you leave now, while you still can." Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. "No more games, Mr. Caldwell. I know what you've been doing. The threats, the break-in, the attempts to sabotage Blackwood Industries. It ends now." She reached into her purse and pulled out a file, spreading its contents across the table. The men's faces paled as they saw what it contained: financial records, emails, and photographs that clearly implicated them in a web of corruption and illegal activities. You see, gentlemen, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger, while you were so busy trying to intimidate me, you failed to notice that we were building a case against you. Every threat, every underhanded tactic, has only given us more evidence. Gerald's face had turned an alarming shade of red. You little bitch, he snarled, his composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? We built this city. We control everything. You're nothing but a jumped-up secretary who got lucky. Sarah leaned back, a small smile playing on her lips. And yet here I am, Mr. Thompson, with enough evidence to bring your entire empire crashing down. So tell me, who's really in control now? The tension at the table was palpable. Sarah could see the men exchanging nervous glances, clearly trying to decide how to handle this unexpected turn of events. She pressed her advantage, determined to get them to incriminate themselves further. I want to know why, she said, her voice softening slightly. Why go to such lengths to protect a corrupt system? Don't you see that ethical business practices benefit everyone in the long run? Robert Caldwell let out a harsh laugh. Ethics? Integrity? Those are luxuries for people who can't handle the real world of business, my dear. This city, this entire country, was built on the backs of men like us. Men who aren't afraid to do whatever it takes to win. Another man, who Sarah recognized as James Morrison, a prominent Wall Street investor, chimed in. You naive little fool. Do you really think your precious reforms will change anything? There will always be men like us, and there will always be a system that favors the strong over the weak. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine at the cold conviction in their voices. These men truly believed in their right to exploit others, to crush anyone who stood in their way. But instead of fear, she felt her determination grow even stronger. You're wrong, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. The world is changing. People are waking up to the cost of unchecked greed and corruption. Your way of doing business is dying, gentlemen, and no amount of threats or intimidation will save it. Suddenly, Gerald lunged across the table, his hand closing around Sarah's throat. You want to talk about threats? He snarled, his face contorted with rage. How about I show you just how serious we are? Sarah struggled to breathe, her vision starting to blur. Just as she was about to use the code word to call in the FBI, chaos erupted in the restaurant. Agent Roberts and his team burst in, guns drawn, shouting for everyone to freeze. In the confusion, Sarah felt Gerald's grip loosen. She gasped for air, stumbling away from the table as the FBI agents swarmed in, quickly subduing the shocked conspirators. As handcuffs were slapped on Gerald and his associates, Sarah leaned against a nearby wall, her legs shaky but her spirit unbroken. She had done it. They had the evidence, the confessions, everything they needed to bring down this corrupt network once and for all. Agent Roberts approached her, concern etched on his face. Are you all right, Miss Johnson? That was incredibly risky. You should have used the code word earlier. Sarah managed a weak smile. I'm fine, Agent Roberts. And we got what we needed. It was worth the risk. As she was led out of the restaurant, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in a mirror. The woman looking back at her was battered but unbowed, her eyes shining with the light of victory. She had faced her tormentors, stood up to their threats, and emerged triumphant. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. The arrests at the Golden Peacock had blown the lid off one of the biggest corporate corruption scandals in New York's history. Sarah found herself at the center of a media storm, hailed as a whistleblower and a champion of ethical business practices. Blackwood Industries stock, which had been struggling under the weight of the attacks and negative press, soared as news of the arrests spread. Investors, impressed by the company's commitment to integrity even in the face of extreme pressure, were clamoring to get on board. One afternoon, as Sarah sat in her newly restored office, poring over plans for the company's future, there was a knock at the door. She looked up to see Victoria entering, a proud smile on her face. "You did it, Sarah," Victoria said, her voice warm with admiration. "You took on the old guard and won. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like it." Sarah felt a blush creep up her cheeks. "We did it, Victoria. I couldn't have done any of this without your support and guidance." Victoria waved away the praise, settling into a chair across from Sarah. "You know, when I first saw you standing up to Jonathan all those months ago, I knew there was something special about you. But I never could have imagined just how far you would go." Sarah's mind drifted back to those early days, when she was just a scared assistant trying to survive in a hostile work environment. "It's hard to believe how much has changed," she mused. "Sometimes I still expect to wake up and find this has all been a dream." Victoria leaned forward, her expression serious. "It's not a dream, Sarah. You've changed Blackwood Industries, and you're changing the face of corporate America. But you should know, the fight isn't over. There will always be those who resist change, who cling to the old ways of doing business." Sarah nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I know. But we've shown that it's possible to run a successful company ethically. We've given hope to employees everywhere who want to work for companies that value integrity as much as profits. I'm ready to keep fighting, for as long as it takes." Just then, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. Her eyes widened as she read the headline, "Jonathan Blackwood TO stand trial, former CEO faces justice as new evidence comes to light." She showed the article to Victoria, who let out a low whistle. "Well, it seems the chickens have finally come home to roost for my dear ex-husband." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions at the news. Jonathan Blackwood, the man who had once seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was now facing the consequences of his actions. It felt like the closing of a circle, the final chapter in the story that had begun with a humble assistant standing up to her arrogant boss. As Victoria left to handle the inevitable media inquiries, Sarah found herself drawn to the window, looking out over the New York skyline. The city stretched out before her, a landscape of possibilities and challenges. She thought of all the people who had supported her on this journey: Emily, who had risked everything to help expose the corruption, her family, who had stood by her even when the danger seemed overwhelming, the employees of Blackwood Industries, who had rallied behind her vision of a more ethical company. But most of all, Sarah thought of the person she had become. The shy, insecure assistant was gone, replaced by a leader who had found her voice and her purpose. She had faced her fears, stood up to powerful enemies, and emerged stronger for it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Sarah made a silent promise to herself and to all those who had believed in her. She would continue to fight for what was right, to push for change in the corporate world, no matter the obstacles that lay ahead. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be new challenges, new enemies to face. But Sarah Johnson was ready. She had found her strength, her purpose, and she wasn't about to back down now. As she turned away from the window, ready to dive back into her work, Sarah caught sight of her reflection once more. The woman looking back at her stood tall, confident, a far cry from the timid assistant who had first walked through Blackwood Industries' doors. She had found her voice, and she intended to use it. For herself, for her colleagues, and for everyone who had ever felt powerless in the face of corporate greed and corruption. The humble assistant had become a force for change, and her story was far from over. Little did Sarah know, as she settled back into her chair to continue planning for Blackwood Industries' future, that her greatest challenge was yet to come. Across town, in a maximum security prison, Jonathan Blackwood sat in his cell, a dangerous smile playing on his lips as he read the news of his impending trial. "Oh, Sarah," he murmured, his eyes glinting with malice. "You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming." This game is far from over. As night fell over New York City, the stage was set for a final, explosive confrontation. Sarah Johnson had overcome so much, but her ultimate test still lay ahead. The war for the soul of corporate America was about to enter its most dangerous phase, and Sarah would need every ounce of courage and determination she had gained to face what was coming. The humble assistant had become a warrior for justice, but the battle was far from won. As Sarah worked late into the night, blissfully unaware of the storm gathering on the horizon, destiny was preparing to test her like never before. The morning sun had barely risen over the New York skyline when Sarah Johnson's phone rang, jolting her from a fitful sleep. It was Agent Roberts, his voice tense and urgent. "Miss Johnson, we have a situation. Jonathan Blackwood has escaped custody." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What? How is that possible?" "We're still investigating, but it appears he had help from the inside." "Sarah, listen to me carefully, you need to get to a safe location immediately. We have reason to believe you're his primary target." As Sarah scrambled to dress, her mind reeling from the news, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was the moment everything had been building towards. All her battles, all her growth, it had all been preparing her for this final confrontation. Within minutes, a team of FBI agents arrived to escort her to a safe house. As they sped through the early morning streets, Sarah's phone buzzed with a flood of messages and missed calls. News of Jonathan's escape was spreading like wildfire. One message caught her eye. It was from Victoria. "Sarah, be careful. Jonathan is more dangerous than ever. Remember everything you've learned. You're stronger than he knows." Sarah closed her eyes, drawing strength from Victoria's words. She thought of how far she'd come, from the timid assistant cowering under Jonathan's cruel gaze to the woman she was now, a leader, a fighter for justice. Just then, the car screeched to a halt. Sarah looked up to see their path blocked by a jackknifed truck. Before she could react, the windows of their vehicle exploded in a hail of gunfire. "Get down," one of the agents shouted, pushing Sarah to the floor of the car. In the chaos that followed, Sarah felt herself being roughly pulled from the vehicle. She struggled against her captor, but a sharp pain in her neck made the world spin. As darkness closed in, she caught a glimpse of a face she'd hoped never to see again, Jonathan Blackwood, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. When Sarah regained consciousness, she found herself in a dimly lit warehouse. Her hands were bound, and her head throbbed from whatever drug they'd used to subdue her. As her eyes adjusted to the gloom, she saw Jonathan pacing before her, looking disheveled but dangerously focused. "Welcome back, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. "I do hope my associates weren't too rough with you. We have so much to discuss, you and I." Sarah met his gaze defiantly. "There's nothing to discuss, Jonathan. It's over. Even if you kill me, you can't undo what's been done. The truth is out there." Jonathan's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Oh, my dear, naive Sarah. You still don't understand, do you? This was never just about me, or even Blackwood Industries. This is about power, who has it, who doesn't, and what people are willing to do to keep it." He leaned in close, his breath hot on her face. "You see, while you were playing at being a crusader for justice, you stirred up a hornet's nest. There are powerful people out there, Sarah, people who make me look like a small-time crook in comparison. And they're not happy with the changes you're trying to make." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine, but she refused to show fear. "So what's your plan, Jonathan? You can't possibly think you'll get away with this." His smile was cold and confident. "Oh, but I will. You're going to help me, Sarah. Together, we're going to undo everything you've done. You'll confess to fabricating evidence, to using your position for personal gain. You'll destroy your own reputation and reinstate me as the rightful leader of Blackwood Industries." Sarah couldn't help but laugh, despite the gravity of her situation. "You're delusional, Jonathan. I'll never do that." His eyes hardened. "I thought you might say that. That's why I took the liberty of inviting some guests to our little reunion." With a nod from Jonathan, a side door opened, and Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Two of Jonathan's thugs entered, dragging a bound and gagged Emily with them. Behind them came Sarah's mother and younger sister, both looking terrified. "You bastard," Sarah breathed, feeling a mix of fear and rage course through her. Jonathan's smile was triumphant. "Now then, shall we discuss the terms of your cooperation?" The next few hours were a nightmare for Sarah. Jonathan laid out his demands in excruciating detail: a press conference where she would confess to fraud and corruption, signed documents relinquishing her position at Blackwood Industries, a recorded statement exonerating Jonathan of all wrongdoing. All the while, Sarah's mind raced, searching for a way out. She thought of everything she'd been through, every lesson she'd learned in her journey from assistant to leader. There had to be a way to turn this situation around. As Jonathan droned on, reveling in his perceived victory, Sarah caught Emily's eye. Despite the gag, she could see her friend trying to communicate something. Sarah focused, noticing Emily's fingers moving in a pattern. It took her a moment to realize Emily was using the tapping code they developed during long, boring meetings at Blackwood Industries. The message was clear: phone. Recording. Trust. Sarah's heart leapt. Somehow, Emily had managed to activate her phone, recording everything that was happening. All she needed to do was keep Jonathan talking, get him to incriminate himself further. With renewed determination, Sarah turned back to Jonathan. "You know what, Jonathan? You're right. I underestimated you. Maybe we can work something out after all." Jonathan paused, suspicion warring with triumph in his eyes. "Oh, do go on, Sarah. I'm all ears." Sarah leaned forward, injecting a note of desperation into her voice. "If I do as you ask, destroy my reputation, give you back control of the company, what guarantees do I have? How do I know you'll let my family go?" Jonathan's laugh was cruel. "Guarantees? My dear Sarah, you're hardly in a position to demand anything. But very well, let me lay it out for you. Once you've done everything I've asked, once I'm back in control and you're nothing but a disgraced footnote in Blackwood Industries history, I'll release your precious family." "And what about your associates?" Sarah pressed. "The ones you said make you look like a small-time crook? How can you be sure they'll let you keep the company once you're back in control?" A flash of anger crossed Jonathan's face. "You let me worry about them. I've got enough dirt on every one of those self-important bastards to ensure their cooperation. By the time I'm done, I'll control not just Blackwood Industries, but half the corporate world in this city." As Jonathan continued to boast about his plans, growing more animated and careless with each word, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. He was giving them everything they needed. Suddenly, the warehouse was filled with the sound of breaking glass and shouted commands. FBI agents poured in from every entrance, led by Agent Roberts. In the chaos that followed, Sarah saw Emily break free from her captors, revealing that she'd managed to loosen her bonds. Jonathan, realizing his plan was crumbling, made a desperate lunge for Sarah, a knife glinting in his hand. But Sarah was ready. All the self-defense classes she'd taken since the threats began had prepared her for this moment. With a move that would have made her instructors proud, Sarah dodged Jonathan's attack, using his momentum to flip him over her shoulder. He landed hard, the knife skittering across the floor. As Agent Roberts rushed to secure Jonathan, Sarah hurried to free her family. Tears streamed down her face as she embraced her mother and sister, the relief of their safety overwhelming her. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." The next few weeks passed in a blur of debriefings, press conferences, and emotional reunions. The recording Emily had managed to capture provided the final nail in the coffin for Jonathan and his associates. The corruption network that had seemed so insurmountable was crumbling, its key players facing long prison sentences. Sarah found herself hailed as a hero, not just for her role in exposing the corruption, but for her bravery in the face of overwhelming odds. Messages poured in from employees at companies across the country, thanking her for giving them hope that ethical business practices could triumph over greed and corruption. One sunny afternoon, as Sarah sat in her office at Blackwood Industries, now officially renamed Phoenix Corporation to symbolize its rebirth from the ashes of corruption, she received an unexpected visitor. Victoria walked in, a warm smile on her face and a bottle of champagne in her hand. "I think it's time we celebrated properly, don't you?" As they toasted to their victory, Sarah couldn't help but reflect on the incredible journey that had brought her to this point. "I still can't quite believe it," she admitted. "Sometimes I wake up thinking it was all a dream." Victoria's gaze was fond but serious. "It wasn't a dream, Sarah. It was courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to doing what's right. You've changed things, not just for this company, but for the entire corporate world." Sarah blushed at the praise. "I couldn't have done it without you, Victoria. Without everyone who believed in me and supported me along the way." "Perhaps," Victoria conceded. "But it was your strength that inspired us all. You showed us that one person, no matter how seemingly powerless, can make a difference." As they continued to chat, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert. She gasped as she read the headline, "Corporate Reform Bill Passes, Lawmakers Cite Johnson Effect as Catalyst for Change." Victoria peered at the screen, her eyebrows raised. "The Johnson Effect? It seems you've become more than just a whistleblower, Sarah. You've become a movement." Sarah felt a mix of pride and humility wash over her. She thought of all the people who had supported her, who had risked everything to stand up for what was right. This victory belonged to all of them. As the sun began to set, painting the New York skyline in hues of gold and pink, Sarah stood at her office window, Victoria by her side. They looked out over the city, both lost in thought. "You know," Victoria said softly, "when I first saw you stand up to Jonathan all those months ago, I knew there was something special about you. But I never could have imagined this." Sarah smiled, thinking back to the timid assistant she had once been. "I never could have imagined it either. But I've learned that we're all capable of more than we know. Sometimes it just takes a push, or a really awful boss, to make us realize it." They both laughed, the sound ringing out over the city below. As the laughter faded, Sarah felt a sense of peace settle over her. The road ahead would still have its challenges, she knew. Changing an entire corporate culture, reshaping the way business was done, it wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly hopeful about the future. She had found her voice, her strength, her purpose. And she was ready to face whatever came next. As night fell over New York City, Sarah Johnson, once a humble assistant, now a beacon of corporate integrity, turned away from the window. She had work to do, a company to run, a world to change. The arrogant employer who had once humiliated her was gone, brought down by the very qualities he had mocked: integrity, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right. In his place stood a leader who understood that true power came not from intimidation and greed, but from inspiring others to be their best selves. Sarah sat down at her desk, pulling up plans for Phoenix Corporation's latest ethical initiative. As she began to work, a small smile played on her lips. The humble assistant had found her voice, and the world would never be the same.